Join us as we dive into the history, hauntings, and high strangeness of the world to try to better understand the paranormal. I will be your guide. I am paranormal researcher and investigator Eric Freeman-Sims. Welcome to the Unseen Paranormal Podcast. Hey everybody, thank you for tuning in today. We're chatting with paranormal researcher, investigator, and author Alex Matsuo. Alex is the author of several books on the paranormal, including One Bed Over, A Hospital Haunting, The Brave Mortal's Guide to Ghost Hunting, and The Haunted Actor, and many others. Today we're going to chat about her latest book titled The Hamptonville Hauntings, Ghosts of the Trivet Clinic, and her experiences and thoughts on the paranormal. Alex Matsuo's books are available on Amazon Kindle and her website, alexmatsuo.com. You'll also find more from Alex as the host of the Spooky Stuff podcast or on her YouTube channel. Hey, Alex, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, the book, like I was telling you right before we got recording, I've read the majority of the book. I love it. I love talking about individual locations because these are places that people can actually go to or, you know, may live in the area. And the Hamptonville Hauntings with the Trivet Clinic is pretty interesting, and it's a pretty active place. And I love places that you haven't seen every ghost hunting TV show go to either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot of really good hidden gems, especially around like North and South Carolina. Yeah, I mean, because there's locations, like you said, that, you know, they're featured all the time on TV, and they're also not always the most accessible, especially if they're really expensive.
Right.
Whereas, you know, the Trivet Clinic is like your perfect little small town haunting. It's accessible to teams that are willing to travel and get to it, and it's also not very expensive to access, which, you know, is always great because, you know, sometimes I feel like I have to take out a second mortgage to do this.
Yeah, especially traveling. You know, you spend a lot on room and board and eating and gas and all that stuff. So yeah, it's nice that it's a good location. So how did you get into the paranormal to begin with?
Ooh, yeah, that's a big question for me. So I think like most people's paranormal origin stories, as I call them, I had an experience when I was a kid, of course, as we all do. And I was really curious about it. However, my mom was very against it. She was very anti anything spooky, paranormal, no ghosts, no witches. I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. So, you know, it kind of made sense a bit that my mom didn't want anything to do with it. And I had little experiences here and there that were fairly innocent. You know, in one of my encounters that I had, I was doing a show in this historic theater in downtown San Diego, and I saw a ballerina warming up by the balcony, you know, before the show. And what was weird, though, was, one, she wasn't wearing the costumes that we were wearing. And plus, you know, when you've done a show for like 2 months, you get to know everyone pretty well. And you know everyone's like schedules and routines and everything. I didn't recognize her at all. I didn't know who she was. And I looked over at her, then I looked away, then I looked back, and she just disappeared in front of me. And there is a ghost story about a ballerina, a prima ballerina, who was taken out by her jealous understudy. At least that's what the legend is. So it was like, okay, well, maybe I saw this prima ballerina whose career in life was cut too short. But then in 2005, I was in a really, really bad car accident on New Year's Eve. And this, for some reason, it's been getting harder to talk about, but, you know, revisiting trauma is always fun. So, yeah, I had a really devastating car accident. To put a very short version, I hydroplaned on a freeway ramp. I got out of the car to get my stuff. Another car came and hit me, knocked me over the guardrail, and I fell 25 feet, and I landed on the road below. I had a lot of injuries, considerable amount of internal bleeding, and I had to go to the hospital, obviously. And during that whole experience, especially getting into the trauma room, I'm pretty sure it was an out-of-body experience and not a near-death experience, because I left my body. I could see the doctors working on me. I could walk around the lobby. And I found myself back in the room, and when I looked over, there was another guy in the trauma room with me. And keep in mind, this was New Year's Eve in San Diego, California, with a huge population, and it was raining. So there was a lot of car accidents and a lot of just shenanigans happening that night. So the hospitals were full to the brim, and we were sharing trauma rooms. So I saw another gentleman in the room with me, and he was standing at the foot of a bed like I was, watching somebody on the bed get worked on. I was watching myself getting worked on, so I assumed that he was watching himself getting worked on as well. Long story short, I survived that night. He did not, and it seems that his spirit or something that was pretending to be him or mimicking him, whether it was my trauma or something else, I ended up picking up a spirit attachment from that night, and it lasted for about 8 months, and it was not a positive experience. It was it was pretty devastating, and then eventually it became such a weird norm for me that I became numb to the entire thing, and then a few other things happened, and we ended up getting intervention from the Greek Orthodox Church. Uh, it, it helped a bit. More so, it put a muzzle on the guy. Eventually, it's the most uneventful conclusion to the story. Eventually, I did sort of sit down with him, and I said, I'm sorry that this situation happened to you. I'm sorry that you didn't survive, and I ended up surviving, but you got to stop terrorizing me. This can't keep going. I know
Yeah.
you have a family that misses you and loves you, and just kind of like intervention there. And it actually ended up stopping after that. Again, the most uneventful conclusion. It wasn't like there was this dramatic exorcism or deliverance of the house. It was just sitting down face to face with face to spirit with this guy, and just say, hey, I see you. I see your troubles. I see your struggles, and I'm so sorry you're in this situation, but this what's happening now cannot keep going. So with that in mind, since I mentioned that we got help from the Greek Orthodox Church, the paranormal community in 2006 is very different from the paranormal community today.
Right.
Today, if I were to have a spirit attachment, all I would have to do is even just go on Facebook and say, hey, I have this happening. Can someone help me? And I'll get like 50 messages.
Right.
In 2006, that was not the case. We could not find anyone that would be willing to look at our situation. Even my pastor at the time was like, nope. So, and I think there was a small paranormal community in San Diego, but they were I'm pretty sure they were very much underground, and I couldn't find them, and neither could my mom. And you were talking to a college student with pretty good research skills, and could use Google and ask G's and all that pretty efficiently. I just dated myself there, but so we couldn't find anyone to help us. So I started the Association of Paranormal Study in 2011 because I wanted to be that resource to my community. I didn't want other people to go through what I went through with the lack of support and lack of resources of, learning more about what's going on and just empowering people with education and knowledge on the subject. So, yeah, that was the big motivator. And after that whole situation, I really wanted to dive deeper into the paranormal and just really try to understand what happened to me. I still don't know what happened to me, but I've learned about other things. And that was a really loaded answer to a very simple question. I am so sorry.
No, not at all. No, and I find that's why I always ask the origin story, because I find everybody's, even though they're similar, like with a lot of us having experiences as kids, kind of the Kickstarter tends to be different. We all have a different journey that we take, and that's fascinating and crazy that you got this attachment because of that traumatic, crazy event, and you just happen to be the closest person to this guy whenever he didn't want to cross over. That's an interesting story.
It is. It still perplexes me, and it took me about 15 years to actually share it. And of course, I shared it on Haunted Hospitals, but we all have those stories that, we're willing to believe, and other stories that we're like, I'm not sure about that. And I always find that story lies in the category of, I don't know about that. Or people will try to paint it as, oh, that wasn't a human, it was a demon, and it wasn't a demon.
Yeah.
It could have been something more inhuman, yeah, maybe, but I think because in Japanese folklore there is a belief that spirits and demons and whatnot can sprout from trauma, especially if that death is traumatic, and a spirit could manifest from that. Now, could that have been the case? Yeah, maybe. But it's always interesting to hear people try to give their interpretations on what happened, and I always try to to tell the story as accurately with as much detail as possible to help people come to a more informed conclusion. But as soon as people hear like the words like attachment or death or anything like that, it's automatic. Oh, it's a demon.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
drives me crazy.
Yeah, I'm with you. I rail about that all the time on my show. Like, I've been doing this for 25 years and I've not come across a demon. I've come across some nasty, nasty spirits, but hard to call anything a demon or demonic. And also, talking about demons, just a lot of that you look through it through the lens of religion, and so that plays into a lot of that. But without going down that rabbit hole, yeah, pop culture has a lot to do with that right now because it's so popular on the TV shows.
100%. Yeah, I always blame a certain TV show. I won't say it here, but yeah. It's like, I always blame a certain individual. I like to nickname him Thackeray Bagoons, but I blame him.
It's okay. You're amongst company. I talk smack about them all the time. So.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, my audience is pretty familiar. Yeah, and yeah, no, I'm nice. When I do events, everything, that's the one that I bring up. I'm like, it's not like TV. People, stop believing it's entertainment.
Yep. It's like sometimes you feel like you have to shout it from the rooftops too. Sometimes it's like, really, friends, really.
Yeah. So you've written several books on the paranormal and your experiences. So your newest book that I wanted to talk about today is the Hamptonville Hauntings: Ghosts of the Trivet Clinic. So how did you get involved with the Trivet Clinic to have all these experiences to compile into this book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I was I had lived in North Carolina for about maybe 5 years at this point. Well, 4 years when I first heard about it. And it was really hard. It's really hard to find places in North Carolina to investigate sometimes because there are several locations that have exclusive contracts with certain teams, which, that's fine. I can see why they do that. But it also makes it really tough to find opportunities, if that makes sense, especially if you're not like a North Carolina native. And I was having some major trouble finding a location. So I was at Con Carolinas one year, and the director of the Charlotte Area Paranormal Society, Tina McSwain, she said I was expressing my grievances of not being able to find places to investigate to her, and she was like, "Well, have you ever heard of the Trivet Clinic?" And I said, "What now?" And she, told me about it, and I was really interested when she told me, but it also took me like maybe like 6 months to a year to even follow up on that. It's like, hey, what's that place that you said was available? Yeah, so really I have to credit her for introducing me to the place. And yeah, I was looking for a place to take my meetup group initially. And then the first night that we were there, I caught this little EVP of a voice. We were trying to engage the kids in the basement. And I said, touch one of us, let us know who's it. And you hear this little voice just say, tag. And, after that, I was hooked. I was like, okay, I need to come back here with less people. I need to come back and really do a deep dive into this location. So since 2018, I try to go at least once or twice a year. It's getting a little trickier now because I moved to Northern Virginia. Yeah, so I try to get there at least once or twice a year. When I was living in North Carolina, I try to get there a bit more often. COVID did impact my frequency of visiting because of restrictions, but it's a place that I can just keep going back to over and over again for years, and I've yet to get tired of it.
Yeah, after reading the book, it's somewhere I definitely want to go. I live in Tennessee, so it wouldn't be too terribly far for me to go, probably 5 or 6 hours. And it would definitely be worth a trip to go stay overnight and check the place out.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. It's definitely one of those places, and it's fairly inexpensive to visit. It's not going to be like $100 a head or anything like that. And you have access to the entire thing, to the entire place, which is pretty amazing.
So let's get into the history and the meat of kind of why this place may be haunted, and the claim is there's 70 spirits or more there. So where did this start, and how did the Trivet Clinic become what it is today?
Yeah, so really to get to the heart of the Trivet Clinic, we have to look at the man behind the clinic. So The Trivet Clinic was started in 1932 by a man named William Amos Trivet, or Willie Trivet. He was born into a farm family, which meant he also had a lot of siblings, because you have a lot of siblings, that you have a lot of kids to help with the farm. He had some bigger dreams, and he had a brother that had bigger dreams as well, and he went to medical school. His medical school history is a bit interesting. I mean, no worries, everything checks out. He did get his MD, but like where he was ending up, in his educational time is a bit interesting. Somewhere along the line, he met his wife, Gwendolyn, and they were, for the most part, seemed to be trying to make a life in the North. I heard a few things like they were in Pennsylvania or they were in Maryland, so I heard a few different things, but eventually they found their way back to North Carolina, specifically Hamptonville, because Dr. Trivet's parents weren't doing so well. They were, ailing health and whatnot. So they ended up building a house. Actually, the house is right next door to the Trivet Clinic. If you stand in the backyard of the Trivet Clinic, you can see the house. The owners do not own the house, though, so it's a different owner, so you can't really go creeping around there. So 1932, he started the clinic. It was really meant to be like this small town clinic. Babies are born there. You get your tonsils taken out there. Appendixes were removed. His brother did start a dentist practice in the basement. So he had like a full staff of nurses. He had an X-ray machine. It was a full scale clinic and hospital. Now, if there were more intense medical procedures that needed to be done, then they were sent to the bigger hospital in Statesville. Yeah, so it was a rather successful clinic. I mean, Dr. Trivet got considerable press coverage with that nationwide. He got featured in some pretty notable articles because it was a very modern clinic for what it was. You don't really see a modern clinic in a rural area like that. It just wasn't heard of at the time. Sadly, he did pass away in 1938 after a really nasty bout with pneumonia. His wife, Gwen, did try to keep the clinic going for a few more years. She brought in an outside doctor. It just didn't really take. So she ended up selling the clinic to a man named Leo Rivers. And this is where this is where the history gets a bit like, I've learned a lot from looking at primary sources like newspaper articles, but then there's also the stories of the locals. I mean, this clinic was in existence in the 30s, so the people who live in the town today, the people who were treated, it was their grandparents, it was their great-grandparents, their aunts and their uncles that were treated at the Trivet Clinic. Like, those generations are still around.
Yeah.
So I heard a few different things. So I heard that Leo Rivers had a supper club in the basement and a detox clinic on the main floor. I didn't really find anything to confirm the detox clinic, but the locals told me there was a detox clinic. So I don't know if maybe like a game of telephone, maybe that was the cover story for for the supper club. But I was also told by actually a man who ended up living at the Trivet Clinic in the 60s. There was like a secret tunnel to where the nurses' quarters were, and that's where Leo was selling harder liquor, which was illegal to sell like underground. So Leo was one of those like really trying hard to be like his get rich quick schemes. If you look up Leo Rivers in the local papers, he's always like starting a restaurant, or he's selling underground booze, or he's opening an antique shop. Like, something tells me Leo was a very eccentric guy.
Yeah.
Then Leo passed away and his wife took over, and then even before he passed away, somehow, and this goes again to the eccentric philanthropy, they turned the Trivet Clinic into a nursing home. So we have Rivers Rest Home, and then after Leo died, his wife, now this is again where the ownership gets a little bit dicey, you probably saw in the book, where it did turn into Vendora Rest Home, but then his wife was like still like owner. It gets a little dicey there, but we know that the clinic was a nursing home in like two versions of it, which is also very interesting. And then in the 60s, this family, the Campbell family, ended up buying the Trivet Clinic, and they converted it into a residence. They had 3 children. They had 2 sons and a daughter. They had an older son, the daughter was in the middle, and they had just had a baby boy. and the baby boy is the one I interviewed in the book, and I also interviewed the sister. The eldest brother had already passed away by the time I had started, like, really deciding to write this book, and I kind of kicked myself for it because when I first made contact with the daughter, the older brother was still alive. But I didn't really think to write a book at the time. I just thought, oh, research, but also the eldest brother dealt with quite a few demons, mental health wise and also substance abuse wise. So it might have been better. It was probably for the best that we didn't talk.
Yeah.
But he was the one who mainly had the negative experiences in the Trivet clinic. The daughter experienced a few things, but she's convinced that there's demons in the house. And the youngest brother, Kevin, he's like, yeah, a few weird things happen, but it's just interesting to see like how different the experiences are of the kids. And Kevin, the youngest one, actually was the one who spent his entire like adolescence, young adult life at the Trivet clinic. So the fact that he didn't have that negative experience is really fascinating to me. And the eldest, who spent the least amount of time there, was the one who had like, the really negative experiences. So it was a residence until about the 90s-ish. And the house went up for auction to help settle divorce settlements because the Campbells, the couple, the mom and dad, they did end up getting a divorce. And then a gentleman ended up, with the last name of Schubach, ended up buying the Trivet clinic, tried to start his nursery. Now, the Campbells had a nursery as well at the Trivet clinic. It was actually one of the most successful nurseries in North Carolina. Like, they got press coverage for it. It was successful. Schubach tried to do it, but he wasn't quite as successful. And then eventually in 2009, the Trivet clinic is landed into the ownership of the current gentlemen who own it. So the Trivet clinic has a very colorful history with so many layers to it. Like it goes from hospital to detox clinic to supper club to nursing home to residence. It's just so interesting of like the vast history of it.
Yeah, and adding to all that different history, and then you got these undertones of selling illegal alcohol and, and all this weirdness. Yep. You had mentioned the actual home of Dr. Trivet and his wife that is close by, that is privately owned by somebody else that doesn't own the actual clinic. Have you ever heard of any stories come out of there of it being haunted, or are they kind of tight-lipped about that?
So the current owners are tight-lipped about it, but I have heard from the locals that there is some weird stuff happening there. Like I have the address. I keep an eye on it. Unfortunately, so this is the weird thing. So this is a gorgeous house. It was a gorgeous house. Sunroom, multiple bedrooms. I think it's like 2,200 square feet. I mean, it's a sizable house. I mean, it's a pretty good sized house. But the current owners have just let it decay, like the roof. Like there's a hole in the roof that's like the size of a small car that they just leave exposed. And but there's people living in it. So it's a very bizarre dynamic. Like if the opportunity ever presented itself, I would love to try to buy that house, just so that, maybe try to restore it or at least try to get some repairs in and then also investigate it.
Right.
Yeah, because I've heard some interesting things about it. Unfortunately, the current owners are very tight-lipped and very like protective of the house. So I honestly don't know if they'll ever give it up. But I mean, I have the address in my Zillow, and I have an alert set for it. It's like as soon as that thing hits the market, I'm gonna explore it.
Yeah, I'd be interested in keeping an eye on that. I've been looking at places myself, like this place. If it ever goes up for sale, like I want to take part in that, because you always see these ads on Facebook or other places where it's like only $30,000 for this haunted location, but it's always somewhere like across the country or something.
Right. Yep. It's always like this really random, like, yeah, it's kind of infuriating. It's like, really?
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's inaccessible. But I mean, even if I got the house, it would be a bit tricky for me to, unless I just, move down to Hamptonville for a couple months while I get the house together and ready. But, I'm trying to manifest that. Like, hey, this is something I'd like to have. Just FYI.
Yeah.
Put it out there. If you like to make it happen, that'd be great. Universe.
So like I mentioned before, it's been said that there's 70 or more spirits in this house, but there were some that are kind of more dominant than others that have kind of come across even before you started investigating there.
Yeah. So the Sunday ghost thing initially took me aback a bit. I was like, wait, really? Really? I don't know about that. What's really interesting, and I learned this when I interviewed Vicki Campbell, who was the daughter that lived at the house or lived at the clinic, and she was telling me about how her parents changed the floor plan and how they built walls, tore down walls, and all this stuff. And she's told me when they were going through the basement. And I found this really interesting because Kevin Campbell did confirm that Kevin is the youngest son. He did tell me that, there was a dentist chair in the basement that he would play on. So this was Dr. Trivett's brother's dentist chair. So that got left behind and somehow survived. It somehow survived the supper club, the detox clinic, and all the nursing homes. And it was still down there. And so Vicki Campbell told me when they were going through either Dr. Trivett's office or the basement, they found all these jars of body parts. Now, before anyone gets concerned that Dr. Trivett was running some illegal organ harvesting scheme, body parts in jars wasn't too unheard of, especially in that time, especially for small town doctors who were very much separated from the larger hospitals. You want to look at, like a liver, like after, liver disease has taken effect, like what does that look like? Right. So that's not necessarily out of the ordinary. And when Vicki told me that, I asked her, I said, "Oh, what did your parents do with the body parts?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, we just threw the jars into a hole and we buried them." And I'm like, "Huh. Okay, well, that might explain a few things."
Right.
That could explain a few things, depending how those organs came to be, and if there may be some traumatic situations tied to them, or but again, it's the 1930s, so it's like, well, organ donating wasn't it what it is today. So I was like, well, okay, yeah. So that took me aback a bit, and there were a few deaths at the Trivett Clinic as well. Like there was a death from a car accident. There were a couple, accidents involving children that ended up really, becoming, a thing, with like, okay, a couple kids died here and apparently they're still around. Yeah. So I feel like that might explain some of it, but there's so much happening with that location, especially just with the nursing homes and all the different people and the personalities that were there. I mean, you never know. And I mean, it goes, and I do this deep dive into like all the different theories about the place too. It's like, is this place collecting spirits? Is it keeping spirits from moving on? Or, if someone was to like go and they visit the Trivett Clinic and they have an attachment with them, would they stick around because they're like, oh, this place is nice?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's tricky.
Yeah. There's even a piece of furniture that's in there that they have attributed a little girl spirit as being attached to that piece of furniture.
Yeah, so that's the wardrobe. Yeah, that one's interesting too because there's a lot of synchronicities with the Trivett Clinic that I'm very fascinated with, mainly because so Emily shares the name of another person who regularly goes to the Trivett Clinic, or her daughter. So Colleen, who is one of the people I interviewed for the book, she was one of the first people to actually investigate the Trivett Clinic, and she brought her daughter Emily to the Trivett Clinic, and then not too long after that, there's a spirit named Emily that started to manifest there. Same thing with Vicki Campbell, who lived there. There is a ghost at the Trivett Clinic named Vicki. So it's like, and it identified itself as Vicki, which, granted Vicki is a popular name, but it's like, what are the odds of that happening, Like,
right.
Very bizarre.
Yeah, not having those names pop up until those people have visited with those names.
Yeah, it's almost like, ooh, I like your name, I'm going to take that, a little spooky when you think about it, but
Yeah, and a lot of people talk about trickster spirits, and there is kind of a trickster element that kind of pranks people around there and does weird, interesting things. But yeah, you got these trickster spirits who will play into whatever you want them to be, basically.
Yep, exactly. So, and that's part of the reason why also that Vicky Campbell thinks that it's a demon, because she thinks whatever is there is trying to mimic her, which is interesting. Personally, I disagree, but I also don't have her shared experience, so I can't really say like now, that wouldn't be okay. So it's very interesting, and a couple of the ghosts there are tied to the nursing home, like Philip. Philip is a big one with the nursing home. He's the one that's probably the most trickstery of everybody. One of the theories actually I have about the Trivet Clinic, and I'm not necessarily married to this theory. It's just, I was when I was writing the book, I was literally just trying to just putting out all possibilities, so to speak. And one of the ones I thought, well, what if it's not like 70 ghosts? What if it's just one? What if it's just one that's really messing with us?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Yeah, and kind of just playing into whatever you're asking or whatever you're putting out there as far as names, or you're in the basement looking for this little girl spirit, and so this spirit says, okay, well, I'll just be a little girl, I'll just play along with them.
Right. The way this whole thing is just so bizarre. It's like, well, I mean, who am I to say that's not the case? That could be the case. Yeah, especially sometimes, especially when I try to interact with Philip, he's very dry humor and very deadpan, and he's just like one of the encounters I had with him, one of my mediums was we were doing the Estes method, so she had the noise canceling headphones, she had the blindfold and the spirit box happening, and immediately she just says Philip, and I'm like, oh hey Philip, how are you? Dead. Well, thank you, Philip. Thank you. I had no idea. Thank you for that bit of information. But that's just kind of how Philip is. But yeah, but I've also pictured like, what if it's? I picture like almost like a Loki type of entity that could be there too, and they're like literally doing costume changes like as we go to the different areas. It's
Right.
like, oh, there's basement, time to dress up like Majesty.
One of the interesting experiences that you write about in the book that I thought was just fascinating was because Miss Trivet doesn't come to the forefront really at all much, but you had an interesting experience with playing opera music because she was an opera singer.
Oh yes, yeah. So I've had this fascination with Mrs. Trivet. Well, because she had an arts background, and I didn't really understand like how into the arts she was until I started looking her up on like newspapers.com and ancestry.com, and there's so many articles of her. I mean, small town papers, bless them. Literally it's like like Jim Bob crossed the street and stubbed his toe yesterday. It's like like literally that's what the coverage is. Or Mrs. Smith bought a new hat from the hat store, from like the widow. Like it's like things like that. And so a lot of the articles that I found of Gwendolyn were her maiden name is Hartley. It's like, oh, Miss Hartley sang Ave Maria during service on Sunday. Just things like that. And she was singing like almost every week. And I'm sitting here like, okay, she was a singer, but she wasn't really one of those people. She's not one of the known spirits at the Trivet Clinic. And I kind of like found her by accident. But when I was doing the historical research and everything about Dr. Trivet and her, I found it very odd that, not odd for the time, but they had about an 18-year age difference. So that isn't necessarily weird for the time. Usually when someone in their mid-30s, a man in their mid-30s is marrying a woman or a girl who's 18, it's usually like, hey, child rearing purposes. They never had kids. Also, she was in her mid-30s when Dr. Trivet died, and she never remarried. That is also very odd for the 1930s, yeah. 1940s. That is really unheard of. Even if she was well off financially, which she was, and she still worked as a nurse, she never remarried. So I'm like, okay, that's weird. And then I found out that she died in a nursing home in Raleigh, where I was living at the time, and it was only about 10 minutes away from where I lived, which I'm like, huh, okay. And that's also weird because Hamptonville is closer to Charlotte and Statesville than it is to Raleigh. So I'm sitting here like, why did she go to Raleigh for her nursing care needs when Charlotte was right there as well as Statesville? That's weird. It's like that's there's a story there that I don't know about. So I already had like a weird, like this fascination with her. I'm like, okay, so you and I have some similarities to each other. You also died not too far from where I live. Okay, I need to know more about you. So we were doing an investigation after I had done the research on her and everything. And one of my mediums kept saying she was sensing like an adult in the basement, which can be seen as a bit weird because, where the kids are mainly. And so I just started saying all these names just to see if anything inspired a response. And when I said Gwendolyn, all of the equipment started going off. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And, I started to think like, okay, well, she loved opera. She kind of became an alcoholic because she couldn't have that career anymore. Again, which is another reason why after Dr. Trivet died, like she just kind of resigned to becoming a traveling nurse. And I'm like, that's weird. It's like, you could go, fly, be free, and do what you want. So I was trying to think, like, okay, what opera was popular or would have been well known at the time? And so I landed on Musetta's Waltz from Puccini's La Boheme. And when we started playing the music, all of our equipment started going off, like the lights going off, REM pods going off, like everything's going off. And, I'm sitting here having an emotional experience, watching this. And then I'm like, okay, hold on. I need to figure out if this is, if it's not, I need to make sure this isn't my phone making everything go off. And so I started playing Van Halen after that because I'm like, if anything's going to make the equipment go off, it's going to be Van Halen. Absolutely got nothing. Like none of the equipment went off. Nothing happened. So I'm like, okay, well, this is a thing. So that kind of became what I did from now on in investigations. Even if Gwen didn't really come forward, I would play some opera for her and see if she liked the music. And during one of the last times I did that, you could literally hear a woman, like during Musetta's Waltz, just go, which is bizarre. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting how you had the K2 going off kind of with the melody of the song. And that's it's something, it caught my attention because it's something that you don't hear about with investigating, and especially with like the equipment, not going off with the beat or the melody of the music.
Right. Yeah, and the video of that is on my team's Facebook page because we were like, we got to get this recorded. We were very much like, yeah. So usually when I get music like that, it doesn't go off with the K2 meter or anything.
Yeah, there's many other spirits, and we could talk, for a longer time and dive into the history and stuff. But people need to go read the book. It is great. I love how you put also pictures and of all the players involved that you could find, pictures of the house, the newspaper articles that you found about these different events in history and different people that you talk about. I love finding that type of stuff because it makes these people real. They're not just ghost stories anymore. You have pictures of like the Trivet's graves and things like that. That just makes it's the type of book that I love to read just because all of that history and research has been done.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where I wanted the stories of the Trivet Clinic just to become a little bit more real. Like these are real people behind the stories, and they did exist, and they still have dreams and wants and needs, and they still have emotions and desires and disappointments and heartbreaks, and they're much more than just lights on a K2 meter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, or occasional EVP here and there.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So, and I really wanted, and that's a big reason why I wrote the book, was because I wanted people to get to know the people of the Trivet Clinic, because the Trivet Clinic is starting to become a little bit more popular, which is amazing. I'm thrilled about that. But I have seen the lore or the stories and the history of the Trivet Clinic start to get warped a bit. And that was a bit problematic for me, that I was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay, clearly I want to put something out there that at least baselines the history.
Yeah, and kind of get it down so that people have a resource to go to. And
Exactly.
that's what I thought was great, that you started diving into the actual history and stuff, a while back, before kind of the stories and stuff got muddied by the TV shows coming in and making up their own narratives and things like that. And yes, folks, they do that. They come in with scripts, some of them, and make up their own history and their own stories. They're selling a TV show. They have to make money.
Yep, exactly. And it's disappointing too. Like, I was hearing things like, oh, there was a brothel in the basement of the Trivet Clinic, and I'm like, no, no, that's not a thing. Or that Dr. Trivet was a back alley abortionist, and I'm like, oh, no. Like, maybe did Dr. Trivet have to terminate a pregnancy? Probably. It was the 1930s.
Right.
Maternity care was not what it is today, and pregnancy loss is something that's been happening for millions of years. So did he have to terminate a pregnancy? Probably. That probably had to happen, or other tragic circumstances. But he wasn't running a back alley abortion clinic. And that's actually, believe it or not, a story that someone was trying to use to explain the 70 ghosts. And I'm like, nope. I can give you the names of at least 10 people that lived,
right.
That we can track, and I need to put something out there and baseline the stories at least.
Yeah. So what else do you have coming up here soon? I know the book is just coming out here recently, but you got anything else on the back burner that you're working on?
Yeah, I'm actually working on a book about the founding mothers of the paranormal. So, because we know the names Hans Holzer, we know Peter Underwood, we know and I'm not writing this book to try to replace any of these male figures in the paranormal. Definitely not. But there's also a lot of women who contributed to the paranormal. Like not everyone knows who Catherine Crowe is, or Eleanor Sidgwick, or Jane Barlow, Alexandra David Neal, Rosemary Brown, Mary Heyer. Not everyone is familiar with those names, and so I'm actually working on a book a little bit high level, because I'm considering this more of like an introduction of like, hey, check out this lady and what she did in the paranormal, and if you want to know more, go to this resource. I'm hoping to get it out by International Women's Day. That's the plan. I'll be able to create a more realistic deadline after my wedding. But yeah, so I really wanted to get something out there, at least like one place where, and of course I'll have Lorraine Warren and Rosemary Ellen Guiley in there too, because they've made significant contributions to the field, regardless of whether we agree with them or not. It's definitely important to highlight that. But I would love these women to become. I would love Catherine Crowe's name to become synonymous with Hans Holzer. So that people will be like, oh yeah, Catherine Crowe, she did this. Yeah, so that's my passion project that I'm working on it's not working on right now, but it's definitely after the wedding I'm going to be hitting it hard. Yeah, so that's my passion project right now. I do have another book that I'm cooking up, maybe Halloween next year, but it's basically a book about life lessons I've learned from ghosts, which should be interesting. Life lessons and recipes.
Yeah.
One of my TikToks got really popular because I shared the story at the Jenny Wade house where I started getting ingredients for an apple pie recipe, and people were just like, "Oh my gosh, did you bake it?" And I'm like, "It was a pretty generic ingredient list. I mean, I picked up apples, cinnamon, that type of thing, and I'm like, oh, that's an apple pie recipe." But people were like, "Oh my gosh, I would so make that recipe." So I thought it was actually pretty funny. I'm like, okay, if y'all are interested. But yeah, a lot of it's going to be life lessons that I've learned from ghosts. So yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be looking out for both of those books for sure. And I thank you so much for coming on today. I really enjoyed the conversation. I really enjoyed the book as well.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for reading the book and supporting indie paranormal authors.
Yeah, I'd love to have indie authors on, and everybody should go out and read the book. It's an excellent book. And they can find it on Amazon Kindle. It's on your website as well, alexmatsuo.com. And they can go check out your podcast also, The Spooky Stuff, and your YouTube channel.
Yeah, I make a lot of content.
There is nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much.
All right, Alex, thank you so much. Have a great day. Everybody out there, stay safe. We'll see you next time. Join us next time for a new episode of The Unseen Paranormal. Until then, head over to the Unseen Paranormal Lounge on Facebook for all the latest updates and discussions about the show. You can also find us on Instagram, Twitter, or at unseenparanormalpodcast.com. And please rate, review, share, and subscribe to help more people discover the show. The Unseen Paranormal Podcast is proud to be the ambassador for paranormal for Verbal.com. A big thank you to my friend Chris Lips for the awesome theme music. You can find more of his music on Apple, Amazon, or Spotify. And as always, thank you for listening.
To the end of the line. Whoa. And I can feel you as you pass the other side.